Please welcome Carla Wills Brandon back to Late Night in the Midlands. Welcome back, Carla.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, and how are you?
We're drying out down here. We've been flooded, and it looks like we're going to get flooded again in a day or so. So we'll see what happens. I might have to paddle my way back and forth to the office.
Well, you better build an ark.
Well, I live in Hurricane Alley, so we all have our boats and our paddles and all that good stuff in our garages. So when my house becomes an island, I just pull down my kayak and put it in the street and take it to wherever I need to go. So won't be the first time.
You know, that's something
I've
never had to deal with a flood yet, and I've never had to deal with an earthquake yet. So those are two things that I'm not looking forward to, and hopefully I can make it through the rest of my life without contending with those two things.
Well, why do you get off? I've had both. That's not fair. I'm going to whine. That's not
I don't know. That has got to be the scariest thing, especially if you're sleeping and you wake up to the whole place shaking. Really has to be terrifying.
Well, having experienced both and having just made the final repairs to my house from a major hurricane a couple of years ago, I think I'll take the earthquake.
Yeah?
I think I'll take the hurricane. No, I don't know. I don't want any of them. I don't want any of them.
Neither. So you got a new book out.
Yes, this is the third in the series on Departing Visions. I think the last time I was on your show, I talked about the first book, and then after that I put together a second book, and so this is the third in the series. So this is actually my 13th book, but my third on the topic of the departing vision. So the first one is called One Last Tug Before I Go, and with that one, that was a byproduct of me working with a lot of my own clients who had encounters with death and dying, or individuals who shared with me experiences about departing visions and with regard to death and dying. Then the second one, there are different types of afterlife experiences that we can have. That's probably the best place for me to start, so that your audience isn't confused by me, because I have a tendency to confuse people very easily.
Oh, you'll fit right in here.
There's the near-death experience. The near-death experience, that there's a best-selling book out right now by a guy named Eben Alexander, who is a neurosurgeon who he was a big-time skeptic, thought all this stuff was woo-woo, and then he had meningitis, died, left his body, and went to the afterlife, and his guide was a sister that he had never met because he was adopted. And so when he came to, after he healed up from the meningitis, he was able to, there's nothing more rewarding than watching a neurosurgeon holding up his own brain scans as he describes how he was clinically dead, and there was no way for his frontal cortex to invent all of this stuff. So the near-death experience it's typically somebody comes close to death and they leave their body. A lot of folks nowadays who have had cardiac arrest, because people are brought back from the brink of death, they are reporting near-death experiences where they float out of their bodies. They can hear what doctors and nurses are saying. They can even hear comments like, "We've lost him," or "We've lost her," as they're floating above. Then they can float through the walls and be in the waiting room where their loved ones are, and they can repeat back to their loved ones once they're healthy and well again, everything that was said, the tears, sadness. Then they report going up into a tunnel, being greeted by deceased relatives, loved ones, angels, guides, and then venturing forth toward a great white light, which is very loving. And most people who have near-death experiences have a real hard time talking about it when they come back. It's a profound experience. It's very profound. It can take several years to integrate that experience. Then you have what's called...
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say I'm a little curious as to, does the spirit hang around the body for like a few minutes after, say your heart stops? Because, when the doctor brings somebody back, I'm kind of wondering, like, what happened in that little bit of time? Did the spirit leave and say, oh, darn, I got to go back? What happened?
Well, different people have reported different things. My husband had a type of deathbed vision where he conked himself out in the shower. He has vertigo, and he just whacked his head against the tile on the side of the wall, and he went to an afterlife sort of place. The colors are usually described as being extremely vivid, but not everybody talks about hovering around the body. But what they do talk about is they talk about leaving the body, and many of them will talk about going through a tunnel, and they'll also talk about having what's called a life review, where they are shown their life, and we judge our own lives.
I'm going to try to sneak by. When that happens to me, I'm going to try to sneak through.
Oh, come on. I bet you have some loving experiences where you were a loving guy. But that's basically, it's not a miserable experience. It's okay, so we have chosen to be incarnated into this life, and we're here basically to evolve spiritually and to also help those around us evolve a little bit. And we're all of us, every single last one of us, we're kind of at the bottom rung of the totem pole here. We're at the very beginning stages of all of this. And so what we do is we take a look at, okay, so how well did we do? And what do we need to do to improve upon that? When we go to the afterlife, that's what we take a look at. And so that's called a near-death experience. Then people can have what are called after-death communications. And those, a lot of times those are in the form of a dream where you have somebody who, somebody has passed. A good example, I always like to use my grandmother. My grandmother essentially played a big part in raising me, and I think I'd be more of a heathen, difficult terrorist if I hadn't had my grandmother's influence. She basically was there to teach me how to be a decent human being, and my mother had passed away when I was really, really young, and I was very angry, and I was very sad and very distressed, and into all sorts of not very healthy behaviors, and she came along and she mothered me tremendously. And so when she passed, when I was raising my own family, I was devastated. I was very, very upset. My anchor was gone. That's how a lot of us feel when we have a really close relative who has meant a lot to us pass on. We feel like our anchor in the universe is gone. And I had a dream about her. She came to me in a dream. And my grandfather had been the mayor of the city that I grew up in, so my grandmother was always big on dressing well. And she was an immigrant's daughter, so she was also very big on being an American and dressing very American. And so in this dream, the colors were vivid. They were indescribable. And I was sitting at a table, and I was I was devastated. And she walked in, and she grabbed me by the shoulders, and she shook me, and she told me to get over it. She turned around and she walked away. And that's so her. And after that, the grief somewhat evaporated. But other after-death communications can come in the form of, some people talk about seeing butterflies, or picking up pennies, or they can even have a full-blown apparition, visitation while awake, where they see their deceased loved one full and complete standing there and saying, I love you, I care about you, just letting us know that they're all right. So that's the after-death communication. Then there is the departing vision. And departing visions these are experiences that a lot of us have. We have witnessed them, but we don't know where to go to talk about them because our society is incredibly death-phobic. You're not supposed to talk about death and dying in our society. Nope. And so a lot of people avoid funerals. They avoid funeral homes. The aging issues in our culture are ridiculous. There's a whole generation. I always talk about my son's generation, 30 years and younger, who are going to be smacked with incredible issues around aging, death, and dying when they start getting into their 40s because they're going to be so unprepared because their parents are so death-phobic. 200 years ago, I always like to talk about this. 200 years ago, if somebody was getting ready to pass, they usually passed in their own bed. They passed typically with their spouse, with their, if it was a child, with their parents. They passed with their own quilts and covers, and they passed with their own pets, and children were also present at a passing because back then, death and dying, that was part of the landscape, so children were involved. Today, children are I have people who come to my practice, and their big concern will be, my mother has passed away, should I allow my children to go to the funeral of their grandmother? They're very perplexed by this. They see it as being abusive to allow their children to go to the funeral. I remember my youngest son at the age of 3 sitting on my lap playing his Game Boy while my father-in-law was being buried. When my mother-in-law passed away, my 16-year-old was bent on seeing her, and so we said sure, and he went in and he took a look at her and he said, yep, no one's home, and turned around and walked out. But in our culture, we are very, very concerned about children being exposed to death and dying. And when they're not exposed to death and dying in childhood, then they don't know how to deal with it when they get older. So we live in this very death-phobic culture, which is very, very different than it was so many centuries ago. So centuries ago, if someone began having departing visions, and a departing vision is visitation from deceased relatives or loved ones, this was seen as something very normal. It wasn't seen as unusual or woo-woo or witchcraft or hallucination. It was seen as normal. So when somebody would report, oh, my mother's here, my father's here, my uncle's here, what would happen is those at the bedside would say, do they have a message for me? Or tell me what's going on. And so if the dying person would begin talking about visions of an afterlife, those at the bedside would say, really? Tell me more. So this was normal. This is very, very normal. But
yeah, nowadays you've got people who will say, "Oh, that's demonic." Don't connect with it.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens today, and it's incredibly frustrating. So when I was a child, I had 2 departing visions with my own mother, one when I was 15, and then the second when I had just turned 16. And I don't think I talked about the first one last time I was on your show, but I was at the end of, I was coming up on being 16 years old. My mother was very, very sick. And I was at a Sly and the Family Stone concert. Now, Sly liked to do a lot of chemicals, so he had a history of showing up late for his concerts. This was common. So my friends and I, we were all sitting there waiting for him to come on the stage, and suddenly I felt really, really ill. And there was an ambulance on the grounds, and so I just got up and I walked towards the ambulance and asked if I could get in and lie down, and they let me get in and lie down in the ambulance. Well, when I woke up, the concert was over, Sly had shown up, and it was time for us to go home. And so when I got home, I found out that my mother, at the exact time I had crawled into the ambulance, she herself had been loaded into an ambulance and had been taken to the hospital. So that is called an empathetic departing vision. Another example of an empathetic departing vision would be my cousin. My cousin's wife passed away a little over a month ago. And my cousin was one of these guys, career military. He was in Vietnam. He was Afghanistan, Iraq, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Waziristan, all the stans. He made the rounds. And he was an expert in the electrical workings of the helicopter. So he went from being in the military to working as a contractor. He came back, probably 5 years ago, and had the worst case of PTSD, so I did an evaluation on him, and I said, oh, boy, you're off the charts. You have no business going back there anymore. You'll be a danger not only to yourself but to others. And so he remained stateside, and he and his wife were very excited about his retirement, and so they bought an incredible house. I call it the Bird House on the side of a mountain, and then suddenly she became very, very ill. And she called me because she was worried about how he would deal with her passing. And I said, sure, I'll be there for him. I'll dog him and watch him and make sure he does what he's supposed to do. And, well, right before she passed, she had a departing vision where she saw all of her deceased relatives. They had all come to let her know that they were waiting for her and that she was going to be okay. And she was very at peace with passing. Well, at that same time, he happened to be laying next to her, and he saw exactly what she saw. He saw her deceased relatives too, but he has written a book about it called The Widower, and he's still in the process of putting it together. I have a lot of writers in my family, what can I say? But he said that the light, he had also had a near-death experience several years earlier. And when he had his near-death experience, the light was very bright and very loving and white, and he really wanted to go toward it, and he knew he had to come back in order to be here for his wife. And the thing that he said that was so interesting is that Betty's light that she saw was very, very bright, but the light that he saw wasn't as bright because it wasn't his time to go. But he had also an empathetic, that's a type of empathetic departing vision. Now, another type of empathetic departing vision would be where someone is in California and they've got an uncle in New York, and in California, the niece or nephew feels a tightness in their chest and feels sick to their stomach and feels very uncomfortable, and at the exact same time, their uncle in New York is having a heart attack. So that's another type of empathetic departing vision. So I had this experience with my mother, this empathetic experience, but of course I didn't know what to make of it, so I just sort of brushed it off and didn't make much of it. And hello?
Oh yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow, that was weird. Something happened.
What happened?
There was like a brief blip where the sound went out. Okay.
Yeah, because I actually heard it in my headset. I heard it got really quiet, almost like I died. I said, uh-oh.
Well, then we'll have to go looking for your spirit.
Yeah.
Maybe a sunburst or something. Huh, that was strange. Well, so when my mom finally became very, very, very ill, she did have to go to the hospital, and she had to stay at the hospital. And the morning of her passing, I was at home, and I woke up at 5 in the morning, and I knew intuitively that she had moved on. And I was just 16, and I felt incredibly calm. I wasn't upset. I wasn't distressed. It was a very comforting feeling, and I just knew that she had moved on and that she had stopped by to let me know that she had moved on. And so I went downstairs and I waited for the phone to ring, and it did ring. And then after that, of course, there was the drama. At that time, especially, people didn't talk about death and dying. So my grandmother, in order to comfort all of us, She took a phenobarbital, which is a major, major mood-altering drug, ground it up. She put it in the orange juice and in my grandfather's peanut butter sandwich, thinking that this would help us get through this traumatic time. Me, what I had done is I had already gone and gotten the big gallon bottle of wine and taken it up to my bedroom. That's how I was going to deal with the insanity. And we didn't talk about death or dying, and I sure as heck wasn't going to talk about the fact that my mother had stopped by to bid me farewell. And so there was a lot of drama, and that's usually what happens. You can always tell how healthy a family is at weddings and funerals. It's like all their warts come out, all the distress and who doesn't like this one and who doesn't like that one. And so that was, you know, why should my family be any different? Well, years later, probably 10 or 12 years later, I found myself, I had done what I had needed to do to take care of myself. I had finally healed up myself from the loss of my mother and taken care of a few of my very destructive, dysfunctional behaviors. And then I was married, and I was in the process of I was going to have a baby, and I had a practice, and I was writing about addiction and trauma and loss and grief. And I decided to go back home to visit some friends and family. And I was visiting a family friend, and I shared with him my experience with my mother. And he said to me, "Oh, my goodness," he said, "I awoke at the same time that your mother passed, and not only did I wake up, but a friend of hers who is a nurse, the nurse who actually snuck me in to see my mother before she died, because during those days, children were not even allowed in hospitals. So I kind of had to be like, it was like the grand adventure to sneak me into the hospital to see my mother. But she had awoken too and had the same experience. So there were three of us who had awakened at the time of my mother's passing. Well, fast forward to just last year, when I released this book, this most recent book on Departing Visions, I posted an account, a Departing Vision account on my Facebook page, one of my Facebook pages, and my cousin contacted me and she said, "You're not going to believe this, but I woke up and so did your great aunt at the exact same moment of your mother's passing." So that's 5 of us who woke up at the exact moment of her passing. But the sad thing was, here I was, this kid who had just lost her mother, and I had clergy telling me she was in a better place. I had mental health people telling me that she was in a better place and not suffering anymore. I had family members telling me she was in a better place and she wasn't suffering anymore. I was told not to think bad thoughts. And so, of course, I got very stuck in my grief. I was very stuck. And to be honest with you, my dysfunctional behaviors probably kept me from being even more dysfunctional or destructive. And you would think that fast forward all these years later that things would have changed. Well, sadly, it hasn't changed that much, because I will have people who will come into my office and they will sit and they'll look at me and they'll say, "I haven't told this to anybody and I don't even know where to begin. But here's what happened when I was sitting next to Mom as she was dying. She started talking about seeing my father who had died 5 years ago. And then the doctor came in. And so I said something to the doctor about what my mother was saying. And my mother seemed so happy and she seemed so peaceful and she seemed so relieved. And the doctor said to me, "Oh, that's just a hallucination. Oh, you have an overactive imagination. Oh, that's a byproduct of a dying brain. Oh, it's the medication." And I never spoke to anybody about it again. But I need to know from you, was there something really going on? So all these years later, you would have thought that we would be making some progress, and we're still in this place. And I find it really disheartening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had a guest on here a while back. He had all these PhDs, but he was an atheist, and it didn't matter what account you gave him, what type of evidence that you throw his way. It was the brain, it was the dying brain, it was a chemical, it was this, it was that, and I wouldn't be able to argue it too much myself, except for I had experiences that I can't explain, except for to say that I came out of my body. And I know it happened. I know it was real. It wasn't my brain. I didn't bump my head. I certainly wasn't on no hallucinating drugs. So, there's something to it. So that proved to me. So I know, I believe without a shadow of a doubt that when we die, it's just the physical body that's dying, that there is more. There's energy that lives on. It's been proven to me. It's just hard to prove to somebody who's not had that experience or somebody who just will not open their mind to that.
Well, years ago I did Politically Incorrect, and my youngest son was very small, and I really didn't want to leave. It was Halloween. That's like, the holiest of holidays in my household. and I had to fly to California, and I just really wasn't looking forward to the trip, but my PR people told me I really needed to go. And so George Hamilton, the actor, was going to be on the show, and then this very pretty gal her name is Sun Young somebody. She was on the Bewitched show. And then this atheist Harvard scholar, surgeon, was also going to be on the show. And so the amazing Randy from the Skeptical Inquirer was supposed to be on the show, but thank goodness he couldn't make it, and I felt very relieved. He's a horrible skeptic, and he's very in your face. So I flew out to do this show, and Bill Maher isn't exactly open-minded when it comes to spirituality. So he had his show at that time divided up into 3 sections. And so the first section was going to be on the departing vision. And so I got out there and started to talk about departing visions, and George Hamilton was very, very interested, and the actress was very interested. And I have to say that the Harvard skeptic who was on, he was very polite. He was not, he was a non-believer, that's for sure, but he was very polite. And Maher was real ready to get past talking about departing visions. This obviously was not his idea. And so what happened was George Hamilton and the actress wanted to continue talking about it, so we did. We talked about it for the majority of the show. And what I found out from I kept in touch with the Harvard surgeon afterwards for a number of years, and I have found this to be true for most atheists. Most atheists, it's been my experience, and I'm sure it's not all of them, but most atheists who fight to the death, they have some sort of unresolved grief issue that they have not healed from. And so they have anger toward any form of spirituality, any discussions of quantum physics that have to deal with alternative realities, anything that has to do with multiple dimensions and afterlife concepts. They just really don't want to talk about it. They hang on to, it's like a religion for them. It's a form of religion. Extreme atheism is a form of religious addiction. It's just as destructive as any other extreme addiction to any other type of religion. It's very narrow. There's no room for interpretation. To be a seeker and to be open-minded at times is very, very challenging. It takes a lot of courage. You have to have a lot of courage to say, look, I had an out-of-body experience. This was what I encountered. You don't agree with me, but, man, this is what happened to me. I went to study with Raymond Moody years ago, and he was into what is called the psychomantium. And the psychomantium is based on what the ancients used to do is they would look in a clear reflection to make contact with the afterlife, and it would either be a mirror-like reflection or water or a bowl of water. And what he had is he had these dark rooms. They were pitch black. Let me tell you something. You can really hurt yourself in those rooms. And there was just a mirror on the wall, and that was it. And the idea was to sit in these rooms and see if anything happened with the mirror. And Diane Sawyer even interviewed him on this process. And so me and a few other folks met at his house to learn about this process. And I was more excited about meeting with Raymond Moody because he is the godfather of the near-death experience and research. He was the one who broke ground on all of that. And then there were going to be some other people there. There was a woman named Barbara Romer who took a look at hellish near-death experiences and discovered that those people who have those types of experience, that they learn from them, that they start out dark and negative, and that there is a learning process that goes on with them. And she was a hoot. She was like 5 foot maybe, and she was just a hoot. She passed away. And then there were a few other people, and so there were 4 of these psychomantiums at his house. And so I went. My grandmother had just passed, and I went to the first 3 and grieved and cried and bawled and squalled about my grandmother being dead and gone, and I was so upset and passed, and she was passed, and so then we had a light dinner, and then I thought, oh, what the heck, I'll go into the last one. And so I went into the last one, and what I saw were orbs of light. I mean, bluish-white light. There were a multitude of them, and a couple of them went through my body, and when they went through my body, it was the most incredible sensation of love. It was indescribable. Before that happened, the temperature dropped, and I could hear Raymond in the next room talking on the phone about his sprinkler system or something. I don't even remember what he was talking about. But the experience was just so incredible for me, and that was kind of one of my big aha moments. And so after having that experience, I became more bold in sharing my accounts. But with the first book, my first book on the departing vision, I was very cautious about what I shared. And then with the second book, I became more open in my sharing. And then with the third book, at the age of 56, I'm like, who cares? This is a problem. It's a problem in our culture. You got a bunch of people out there who want to keep this on the back burner. They want to scare us all to death with death. They don't want to let go of whatever it is they got going on. If you watch television, and these topics come up, you will see the same people, the same skeptics come on these shows over and over and over again. Now, that Bill Meyer guy, he's a joke, that guy. I've seen him debate UFOs and other things, and I mean, he's like that classroom-type science guy where, if he can't glue the paper to the cardboard box, then it can't be done, That's a good analogy. But you are so true. And the thing that's so sad about that is these individuals have such big following. They have huge following, and so it's very hip to follow someone like that until something happens, somebody gets very sick in a family, or there is a passing. And so I think it's a real disservice when people have platforms like that and fame like that, and they're so closed-minded, and they misuse that.
Well, those are the people that get it. Those are the people who get it. I'm glad you said that, because I've been trying to point that out for a long time now. Those are the people who get those platforms because, it's in the best interest of, what I call the New World Order, to keep people believing that, death is the ultimate. There's nothing after that. You better behave. You better do this. You better do that. You're going to burn in hell. You're going to, so that fear factor that they like to throw at you, they want to keep that alive.
And you nailed it right there. It's all about control. It is. It's all about control. It's about the thing that cracks me up about society is that so many of us in society think we're free, or we think that nobody is calling our shots. It is so difficult to live an authentic life in this culture, because when one lives an authentic life, when one, like at my age, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to cut your hair off, and you're supposed to dress a certain way and behave a certain way, and it's very, very hard to live the authentic life and say, no, I'm going to be who I'm supposed to be for me, I'm not going to be who society wants me to be. I'm not going to believe what is socially acceptable within society. And I think that when you have a celebrity-driven world and you have a few people at the top who are kind of picking and choosing who the politicians and who the celebrities are going to be, and then that trickles on down to the rest of us, and that whole sheep mentality kind of sets in, and we all have to carry the certain type of person, we all have to have the certain type of job and certain type of house. It's just very, very hard to break out of that. And so what the herd will do when one says, hey, wait a second, I'm not doing this, the herd will turn on the one person who is saying, this is not for me. And that is the problem nowadays with anything that has to do with, as you said, we just had a UFO floating over the ocean here 2 nights ago. I was shocked as all get out that it was printed in the paper. I mean, I about, dropped my teeth and everything else. But when people do take those risks and talk about some of these things, whether they're afterlife experiences or multidimensional experiences, or when they want to confront how, okay, we have a bunch of puppets who are running things and what you see is not really what's really going on, there is this overwhelming need to kind of like whip everybody back into shape. And so I think that the people that we see in the media who are so popular right now, that they're not there by accident. And the other thing, I was trying to explain this to my son, as a matter of fact. We just had this conversation at dinner. He was looking at some really, really cute little celebrity. And I said, what's really sad is right now she's really, really cute, but she's going to lose her authenticity. And that's so remember her now. Remember her how she is now, young and bright-eyed and excited, because that's all going to change. And he kind of looked at me and he said, wow, that's really sad. And I said, yeah, it is, isn't it? But that is our culture. And so I know you deal with it. I deal with it all the time. So I'm supposed to be this straight-laced mental health care professional who deals only with drama and trauma in the here and now and everyday life. And, by the way, I'm supposed to deal with it without using alternative methods. I got to throw that in there too. I'm supposed to be doing it the way my peers do it. And if I step outside that boundary, I'm going to get myself in trouble. But to be talking about afterlife contact and to be using that as a form of working with grief and loss and spirituality, yeah, that's a big no-no.
That's right. Carla, hang on for a moment. We've got to take a break here, and then we'll come. This isn't make-believe. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, you can, but I'm not. It's real stuff. I hope that most of you or all of you will have an opportunity to have something like that happen to you. And you do question yourself. Believe me, you go through a lot of questions in your head after something like that as to whether, you're imagining it, was it a dream, and you go through all that. And I've confirmed to myself, based on the information as well that I received, that came true in the days to follow. I mean, I have no doubt that's what happened. But there's a lot more, but we don't have time for me to keep going into my story. So let's get back to Carla And it is a fascinating topic, Carla, and it is something that I think everybody should have some interest in. I guess there's still the hard-nosed people who are not going to believe any of this until they have scientific evidence. Will we ever have that type of proof where it's undeniable to everybody?
Well, I think the last time I was on your show, I talked about some of the research, because most people out there in Normie Land, they don't even know about this research. There were two guys. They were from Iceland, and they were both psychologists, and one of them still alive. There was one named Carlos Osis, and the other one, his name was Erlinger Haraldsson. And what they did is they took a look at the investigations of a man named Sir William Barrett. William Barrett and his wife, who was a surgeon who worked with women, he and his wife had collected numerous departing visions, experiences where women who had given birth, this was early 1900s, late 1800s, they would report, as death drew near, they would report seeing deceased relatives and loved ones. What they would also report, family members would pass and loved ones wouldn't tell them that these family members or friends had passed for fear of upsetting them. But as the passing drew closer, they would say things like, oh, there's so-and-so. Oh, wow, she's here to take me to the other side, or there is my good friend. And nobody had told them that their friend or relative had passed. So this was pretty groundbreaking stuff. This was actually the first little bit of research I read when I was digging around trying to figure out what it was I had experienced when my mother had passed. So what they did is they looked at Barrett's work and they put together questionnaires. And they passed these questionnaires out to thousands upon thousands of medical people, not only in the United States, but in India. And the questions rotated around, what did you see with those patients of yours who were dying? And what they discovered was something really, really interesting. They put it in a book called The Hour of Death. But what they discovered was this. For your friend, the skeptic who was on the show earlier, obviously he has not looked into the research. After analyzing scientifically all of these questionnaires, they discovered that the dying brain theory was out the window, that medication did not account for these experiences, that illness had nothing to do with these experiences, that being religious or even atheist had nothing to do with these experiences, that all of these multitude of individuals who had these encounters at the moment of death, that basically they all saw the same thing, deceased relatives and loved ones. And we're talking about not only in the United States, all across the United States, but in India too. All of these individuals saw deceased relatives and loved ones, and that these deceased relatives and loved ones had come to take them to an afterlife. They also reported other dimensional visions, and when they reported these, they talked about the colors, the intensity of the colors, and how they were greeted by deceased relatives and loved ones. Well, since then, there is a guy in the UK named Peter Fenwick. He's a British physicist, neuroscientist, I think he's a neurologist, he's a neurosurgeon, and I think he's a psychologist. I think that's what it is, yes. And what he used to research in depth was near-death experiences. And he has recently moved into the Deathbed Vision research, and I recently corresponded with him, and he has validated what Osis and Haraldsson and Barrett and myself have come up with. He has the same thing, that these are takeaway experiences, that When individuals are visited, it's not from the next door neighbor, it's not the person across the street, it's not the principal at your kid's school, it's not your postman, it's deceased relatives who come to visit. And he found the same thing, that the dying brain theory doesn't work, that's out the window, medication doesn't work, out the window, oxygen deprivation, out the window. So along with him, there are other researchers in Holland, Ireland, Italy, and even a group associated with the Veterans Administration in California did research. And they, too, have found similar results. But the sad thing is that this information doesn't get out there into the public. So the public doesn't have this information. The public is too busy watching American Idol or reality television or listening to Bill Maher pontificate or to one of these individuals from the Skeptical Inquirer come up with bogus reasoning for why after-death communications aren't real, even though none of these individuals do scientific research themselves. All they do is go on television and make a lot of money, and they give their spiel, and they argue why not, and it's incredibly frustrating. There are groups of individuals who get together for conferences, and we share material with one another. There are cardiologists involved. There are, as I said, physicists involved. There are neuroscientists. I love it when the neuroscientists are involved, the brain people who can say, you are wrong. But there are psychologists, psychiatrists, nurses, experiencers who quietly come together and who share their experiences and who are all very dedicated to helping spiritual evolution, working with spiritual evolution and saying, hey, look, this is what's going on. And if more of us become less fearful of death, if we become, and it's very difficult. This journey is not an easy one. Trust me. I mean, I go through these different levels of growth myself where I'm doing fine and well and everything is rocking along, and then something will just throw me for a loop, and I'll have to go and grow some more myself. So it's not, there are no canned answers here. And I think that society controls us by giving us these very canned answers with regard to psychology, religion, our institutions, and that's very, very easy to just go, oh, wow, okay, so give me that can, and let me just cart that around with me, and that's going to be my belief system. To challenge ourselves in looking at some of this stuff, it forces us to think and feel, and it forces us to take responsibility, and that's really hard to do. So when you have someone who comes on television or comes on a show like yours, and they want to argue and argue and argue, nothing's going to change them unless they haven't experienced themselves. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's what I tell people. It's like, I'm not going to argue with somebody. They're saying that they had that experience. Who am I to say that they haven't? I'm sure some people make it up, but the fact is the majority of the people don't. I know I had experiences, and that's why if somebody says, I don't believe in that stuff, then, okay, well, I feel for you, because when it's all over with and you're standing there and you're thinking, oh, crap, and you're wondering what to do next, you'll wish you thought about this just a little bit. And I find it funny how we come into this life bald, no teeth, could barely see, can't walk, can't do anything for ourselves, right? And it seems like if we're lucky enough, we go out of this world the same way. So
well,
God has a sense of humor.
I have a friend who's going to be 110, and he is one of the foremost parapsychologists around. I mean, he is a trip, and he has lived a very authentic life. And so kind of how I see it, there's another guy named Thomas Campbell. I don't know if I've mentioned him on your show before, but Thomas Campbell is a physicist, and he's another one. He's another one of these guys who's, I don't know, he looks like he's probably in his late 60s, and he is just a hoot. He is really, you can tell when you listen to him talk about alternative realities and about why we're here and about how he feels about the skeptics. You can just tell that he could really care less about what anybody thinks. And the interesting thing is this. I really believe, and I agree with Dr. Campbell, I believe that what we do is that we make choices about our incarnation. And for years I had a real rough time with that because I come from a very, very rough background with a lot of trauma and drama and abuse and loss. And what I had to do is I had to walk through that, and I had to take responsibility for myself, and I had to heal. And that was very difficult to do. The easier path would have been a boatload of pharmaceuticals tiptoeing through the daisies. Now, I'm not totally against pharmaceuticals. Every once in a while somebody does need something, but I'm talking the route I was taking was a shelf full. So I had to take
you were going to become
responsibility.
a pharmacist, huh?
I was there. Boy, I could mix and match, let me tell you. But,
hey, Carla, we have a call. I was going to tell you that before we're done. Yeah, okay. So you want me to take the call now, or do you want to finish?
Well, just let me finish this just real quick. But my point being that I think that if we are willing to take responsibility for ourselves and ask the scary questions and go look for the answers, what we're going to find is that we're going to grow spiritually as individuals, and we're going to like who we are.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what, once you have an experience that's undeniable, and you know that there's more than just this physical plane, you look at life a little differently. And, I'm not afraid to die. I don't want to die tonight, obviously. I've got things I still want to do. But when it comes that time, I know it's going to be scary for everybody a little bit. But for me, I know there's more to it. So, it'll be one door will close and a new one will open. And we've got Becky in Texas. Becky, welcome.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
This is really a great show tonight. It really is.
Thank you.
I was just, I've been listening to the whole show, and Carla is just so fantastic. I just love listening to her interesting stories. It reminded me of an experience that I had with my sister passing away. She passed away about 9 years ago, and she really was like my mother. I'm the youngest of six, and my mother worked a lot, and she got dumped on. She was mom. She had to take care of four of us, and but later on, we always had a great relationship, and, I could always go to her about anything. I could talk to her about whatever. And when I found out that she was dying of cancer, it just really devastated me. She lasted for a lot longer than they expected her to live. She did a lot of alternative medicine, and she used a lot of essential oils. And she also lived about 300 miles from me. And I just, the only prayer I had was, I just want to be there when she dies, I didn't know how I was going to be able to do that since she lived so far away from me. But I got lucky, and when it was time, we went down where she was, and the whole family went down there. And I just was blessed to be in the room with her. But, she talked to everybody, the whole family. She had lung cancer. She didn't really have any lung tissue left. She couldn't talk very well. But she she got to talk to everybody in the family. I thought, oh, I'm just going to get to be there with her, and I'll get to talk to her last. Well, by the time she got to me, she went into coma, and so I didn't get to talk to her, but I stayed with her all through the night, and I cut her hair, and my brother-in-law wanted little swatches of her hair and asked me if I'd cut pieces of her hair, and I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I'll give her a haircut, Well, so the next morning, my brother-in-law came into the room, and as soon as he reached over and he kissed her on the forehead, I could just tell she was bleeding right then. And I said, Mike, she's dying right now. And he said, no, she's not. No, she's not. And I said, no, she's really bleeding right now. And that was her last breath. She just was gone. And I was so devastated because I didn't get to have that little talk that everybody in the family got to have, and I was so sad over it. But it was for days after she passed away, I kept smelling this oil. I knew that she had essential oils, and, we divided a lot of her things up, and my other sister was a deep tissue massage therapist, and she knew what all these oils were, and, they just divided everything up, but everybody had gone home, and, we had the funeral and everything. But when I would drive from my house to my mother's house, we went back home 300 miles back to Fort Worth, and I could smell this oil that I did not recognize. And it was like I spilled it on myself. And, I just couldn't understand what it was. Then I had mentioned it to my mother, and she said, I've been smelling that too. And she didn't understand it either. And I called my sister in New York, and I said, I smell this, and I don't know what it is. And she said, well, describe it to me. And I said, well, it kind of smells like clove oil. It kind of smells like cinnamon. And it smells like lemon. She said, go open the bottle of seeds oil, She said, you got a bottle of that, didn't you? And I said, yeah. And I opened it, and I smelled it, and I said, that's exactly what it is. And she said, well, that Laurie had done seed suppositories for a long time. And she said that I thought, well, for weeks after she passed away, I smelled, every time I get really sad, this smell would come around me, and I thought, that has to be Laurie. That has got to be my sister saying, I'm right here, And so for a long time after that, when I would get real sad, I'd smell that smell, so it was like her comforting me.
So you're a believer.
Oh, absolutely, I am. I truly am. And, I was always real fearful. I didn't, when I was growing up, I never watched scary movies. Death scared the Jesus out of me, But what's funny, when that happened to me, my sister-in-law reminded me that I had been with her mother when she passed away. My husband's mother, when she was dying, I happened to be the one that was left in the room sitting with her when she passed away, and then my sister and my mother and my dad, and why it is that it seems that I'm the one that's there, but I'm not afraid of death anymore. Maybe that was something for me to get over. Have you ever experienced aromas like that?
Well, one of the things that happened when I first moved into this house, I live in a 100-year-old house, and on this island there was a huge devastation in 1900 where a hurricane came along and killed 9,000 people, and so this house was built right after that. And what happened was we moved into this house specifically for the house itself and also for the island because we love living near the water. And I started to smell this rose, a very potent rose aroma around this house. Now, in this climate where I live, of course, there aren't any roses growing around the house, and there were no roses in the house. And what was so funny is I thought, this is very, very odd. And so I kind of went about my business. And then, I don't know, maybe 10 years later, a man showed up on the front door, and he was about 90-something years old, and he showed up with a 60-year-old girlfriend. It was such a hoot. And what he said was, I used to be married to the girl who grew up in this house. Can I come in and can I look around? And we said, sure, come on in. Well, we eventually found out that this was the grandfather of a friend of ours also. It was very, very interesting. But long story short, he showed us where everybody had slept and what kind of things happened in the house. And so in passing I said, did your mother-in-law like roses? And he said, oh, my goodness sakes, she used to keep dried roses around the house. And I thought to myself, well, I'll be doggone. She has been coming back to visit to see what was going on with her house. Now, of course, the smell disappeared, and the smell had been gone for quite some time when I asked them this question. But I'll never forget moving into that house. There had been several people who had owned the house before that, so it wasn't like she had just been there with her rose petals. So I do think that, and there are many, many accounts, after-death accounts, where individuals will report a certain scent that's related to an individual who has passed. Another situation that comes up with the departing vision is that when there is a departing vision, people have also reported scents, flower scents. So that's not uncommon. I think that those on the other side are going to do whatever they can to get our attention, to wake us up.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that really made me a believer. I've always believed that there was I've always thought there was reincarnation and angels, and I've had my own contacts and out of body experiences and stuff, but I think that all of the death that I have had to experience, being alone with a person when they died, I think that was my biggest fear, and that was the thing that I always got exposed to, that I'm not afraid anymore, But I am glad. I do feel like that the aromas of the oils that I was smelling was my sister contacting me saying, I know I didn't get to talk to you, but I'm here with you.
Well, that was her
Becky,
way of
that's a great story.
contacting. Yes. That was her way of contacting you to let you know. That was a great after-death communication.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that with us, Becky. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. I love the show. It's great.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad that you listen, and fascinating, and I can relate to that as well. I don't know how many times you get that aroma, that smell, and it just, and it's unique. And, you got to wonder, is that so-and-so? Like my mom had this, I don't know, I don't want to offend anybody, but it was I called it kind of old lady perfume that she, yeah, I'm going to end up falling out of my chair here now. But, and I used to get that smell. I used to be, and even today, still, once in a while, I could smell it. And I don't know if it's just something in our brain that locks that memory of that scent, or if we're actually getting a visit.
Well, I think that on the other side, they're going to use whatever they can to get our attention. So, because they are always around us, it's not like they have taken off somewhere. I mean, yes, growth continues, but they're still around us. And so if we're aware, if we can allow ourselves to be aware, it may be a song. I can be in a really, really bad place, and then a song that's related to my mother that maybe hasn't been on the radio for 9,000 years all of a sudden comes on. Or if I'm sitting at the beach and I'm really upset about something, then all of a sudden I'll see a herd of dolphins go by, and that has special meaning for me. So what happens to us when we have these experiences is that there is this awareness and imprint, a sense of knowing. It's like a knowing. It's some, we do our lives, we get up in the morning, we brush our teeth, we take care of our families, we go to work, we do what we got to do, and we're kind of like locked into this mentality to just make it day by day. But if we can raise our own vibration just a little bit and be aware of what's around us. Now, when we do that, we have to risk, because that also means we're going to feel some feelings. So if we're having some, just because our loved ones go to the other side, that doesn't mean we're not going to have grief. Last summer and fall, I had 2 clients commit suicide. I had a friend commit suicide. I had a cousin commit suicide. I had a cousin die. And then I had a really good friend die. So, a lot of really dear people, they made the journey. And though I know that they're fine on the other side, continuing their own spiritual evolution, wow, I was sad, and I had to have my emotions and my feelings about that. So when we do make the decision to be more open, we're going to feel more feelings. We're going to feel more intently. So we're going to become more passionate about certain things, and we're going to become easily angered. And so what that means is we're going to have to learn how to have our anger in a responsible way. We might even feel more fear, and we're going to have to learn how to deal with that also. So that's what happens when we're willing to do those things. But the other side is that, sure, yeah, so then we're more open and to dream material, and we're more open to being aware about with regard to what's going on around us and who may be trying to get in touch with us on the other side. So, some of the things that can happen for us are just incredible if we're just willing to be authentic, and we don't have to do it all at once, because I know how scary it is, I mean, if we can just take baby steps, maybe being authentic is something as simple as going, for me, believe it or not, it involved getting my first tattoo. I know that sounds very superficial, but it broke every single family rule.
Hey, to each their own,
Man, it did, and it helped me begin to move from being more physically authentic to being emotionally authentic. So that's the bit of the journey we have to take.
See, and I always tell people when they ask, how do you handle somebody so close to you passing away, you never get over it. You just learn to live with it. You come to terms with it and accept it at some point. No, you're not going to like it. There's going to be times you're going to think back and still shed a tear, or even 10, 20 years later. But you have to learn to live with it, because if you don't, my God, what a horrible life.
Well, see, and the way so every time my sons had a new milestone in their life, what I would do, I have to go grieve, because my mother's not here, or my grandmother's not here. If an anniversary comes around, a passing anniversary comes around, for certain people, there are certain things that I do to make sure that I'm aware of that, because what a lot of us do is we even forget the passing dates of our loved ones, and all we know is that we are feeling crazy, but we don't know why. But by acknowledging that, that just because I have a belief in the afterlife, that's not going to rid me of my grief. So when one of my sons gets married, I'm sure that I'll have a moment of real sadness that my mother's not there. But that's part of being an authentic person. When we don't take responsibility for our emotions, we set ourselves up for serious problems with dysfunction or addiction. I've been sober for 28 years now off of all those pretty pink, blue, yellow, green pills chased with really
good.
cheap booze. Yeah, but, I was so cut off from myself because there was no way I was going to grow spiritually, and there was no way I could be responsible until I took responsibility for that.
Absolutely right.
And once I took responsibility for that, then there were other things I had to take responsibility for. So it really is an inside job. And so as long as I allow myself to continue to feel my feelings and do what I need to do, sometimes we have to go get a little extra help from people who are like-minded. If you're going to go see a therapist, don't go see a therapist who won't listen to you or who discounts your experiences. If you're going to see a therapist and something in your gut says run in the opposite direction, run in the opposite direction. If you're seeing a physician...
And I think also that goes back to what you were talking about, how, kids used to go to these funerals. When I was growing up, an aunt, uncle died, somebody passed away, I was there as a little kid. So kind of conditioned me later in life. I guess, I knew it's inevitable at some point, everybody's going to die and you're going to have to deal with it unless you go before they do.
Well, and the other thing is, I think that's really great. I don't know how old you are, but I know that you are younger than me because I can just tell.
I'm 41.
Well, that's incredibly unusual. For you to be in your age range and to have been exposed to funerals like that, because so many kids are not exposed to funerals, and that, like I said, they are whisked away, and kids today are not given a lot of life experiences either. So a lot of kids are they see what's on television, they see Paris Hilton, and they see some of the other things, and they think that that's the way life is supposed to be, and so they have a more difficult time becoming more authentic and feeling okay about being quirky or unusual or different. When I see
look at some of the sports. They want to, take away keeping score. It's like, because they don't want to have to tell some kids that they lost, So, they grow up not experiencing these things, and I think it's important, winning, losing, all of that.
Well, I have this aunt, and she's in her 90s, and she's a Holocaust survivor. I may have talked about her before. And one of the interesting things about her story is that she's so funny. I saw her at Thanksgiving, and I asked her how she was doing, and she said, "You just do what you're supposed to do." She lost her first husband in a concentration camp. She lost her mother in a concentration camp. She lost a slew of her cousins in a concentration camp, and she survived. And the reason why she survived is because she had experienced adversity before the Holocaust. So in experiencing some adversity before the Holocaust, what happened for her was she developed some survival skills. We can't develop survival skills if we don't have adversity and frustration in our early years. Now, it doesn't have to be a horrible childhood like mine by any stretch of the imagination, but adversity does. They used to say adversity builds character. I hated it when my grandparents said that, but there's some truth to that. And as a consequence to the adversity that she experienced, she was able to not only survive the Holocaust, but she found a way to get to this country via via England, because they had cut off how many people could come over here. And so what she did is she found a way to come over here. And when she got here, she married another Holocaust survivor, became a citizen of the United States, learned the language, and then she and her husband and one other Holocaust survivor looked around and said, okay, if we were going to get into business, what is it we would do? What's the one thing that's always needed? And they said, people always need food. And so they went into the ham packing business. So you had these Jewish people who were importing ham, and back then Jewish people did not eat ham, but they were selling it to grocery stores. And what happened was she built a huge, huge business. And her husband passed away, and then this other person who was in the business with them, he moved on. And so in the 50s and 60s, she was a major player in the business world. And she was one of these people who was she was very frightened of looking at her own history, but she was able to do what it was she needed to do to support her family at that time. When her family had grown up and it was time for her to heal herself, she took responsibility, became very courageous, and 14 of us flew to Poland. And we took her back to Auschwitz, to the camp where she had survived. And she walked us through Auschwitz. She survived 3 camps, actually, but she walked us through Auschwitz, and she told us, blow by blow, what had happened to her. And in doing that, I got to watch her heal at the age of 83. And then as a consequence to doing that, she founded an organization that teaches young teachers about the Holocaust so that they can teach it to their students. And so I guess my point, what I'm saying, is that all of us can learn from that. I mean, in taking personal responsibility for ourselves, if I don't take responsibility for myself first, I can't be responsible in my primary relationship, which is with my husband. And if he and I can't be responsible for our relationship, we can't be there and be responsible for our children. And if we can't be responsible for our children, we're not going to be able to teach them to be responsible for themselves. And as a consequence to that, then they won't be able to, go through the stages of life, first the childhood years, trial and error, and then the silly teenage years, and then the trial and error years of young adulthood, and then get to that age where they start asking spiritual questions so that they can grow spiritually. That's the process of spiritual evolution. And so our job as, if you want to, some people call it a light worker. I just like to call it, me taking responsibility for my own stuff so I don't mess up anybody else's stuff. But if we can do that, if we can take responsibility like that, then what we can do is we can offer a hand up to the person who comes to us and asks for some information. So that's kind of where I got to with regard to my own work with Deathbed Visions. Did it make me pain-free and worry-free and fear-free and all those human emotions that come with living in this physical body? No, it didn't, because those still do crop up. But what it has...
Carla, I was just going to say we're getting a little down on time here, and we have another call, so I want to give you an opportunity to get out whatever information you'd like, websites and such, and I got to get you back for a full show.
Okay.
And yeah, 'cause I'm really enjoying this.
I am too. I always like coming on your show.
Well, thank you. So
you have great stories. I love your stories. I love your mother's stories.
Well, thank you. No, they're authentic. I mean, it's I just wish everybody could have these experiences, because if they could, they wouldn't be so quick to dismiss this.
How many times have you been out of your body?
I've had it happen 3 times in my life. Twice when I was a child, and once as an adult.
Wow, I'm so jealous.
And I did not control it. I didn't try to do it. It just happened.
It just happened.
It was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. I describe it like this. It's like, I don't know, it's like being in your car. You can see out of the windows, and that's it, And it's coming out of your body is like getting out of that car and standing on the roof. I mean, you can just see everything. It's amazing. Yeah. Wow.
Okay, well, the easiest way to find out more than you need to know about me is to go to www.carlawillsbrandon.com, or you can go to Facebook and go to Carla Wills Brandon authordigspage.com, or what you can do is you can go to YouTube and just search for Carla Wills Brandon or Deathbed Visions or Departing Visions, and then you can take a look at a few clips that I've posted up there.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much, Carla. And let's take this last call, and then I have to go to my break, and I've got to get Peter Kling on with us. So, Rhonda in California, welcome aboard. Thanks for waiting.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Carla.
Hi.
Hi, Rhonda.
Hi. I have a question which was stumping me for the longest time. My father-in-law died in '96, and that's the time that my sister-in-law, his daughter, got pregnant. And before he died in the hospital, but just before he died, we went and seen him, and he wasn't told that at that time when my sister-in-law walked in the room that she was having a baby. So, but just before he died, what he did was he cupped his hand like he was holding a baby, and he was cradling it. And he looked at my sister-in-law and said, "Such a beautiful baby boy," and named him Adam. He's seen this baby before he passed away. Not knowing that she was not pregnant and stuff, but he's seen the little soul of that little baby in his arms. Now, I have a question. How could he, if the baby wasn't born yet, how could he have seen it before the baby was born?
Well, that's a pretty easy one. Decades ago, what they used to say when somebody had a departing vision is that they had one foot in this world and another in the next world. And this isn't the first account that I've heard about this sort of experience, where someone is getting ready to pass and somebody is either pregnant and the pregnancy hasn't been revealed, and a comment is made by the dying person about the baby being born, or there is a comment about there is a baby with them on the other side, a soul on the other side. So, you know, I mean, we're supposed to be at our most psychic as a general population when death nears. In certain cultures, this is very accepted. It's very accepted. It's known that
so
we're going.
So that he's seen the baby's soul before he passed away?
Well, he had probably already had a departing vision and made a soul journey himself to the afterlife. And so he had that awareness. He already had that awareness. And so for him, as I said, one foot in this world, another in the next. And so he was aware that this baby was this baby was coming, and he had already made contact with the soul of that baby. So.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an awesome
Wow.
account. That's a really great account.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because right after that, it's like he stopped, he looked at the edge of his bed, and he was talking to his son that passed away actually that same year. And his son passed away of diabetes. And he's seen his son, and he reached out and to him, and he says, I see Eddie. He says, Eddie wants me to go now. And he takes his arms and holds him out to the end of the bed. And like a few seconds later, he was gone.
But see, that's a classic departing vision. I mean, what a great way to end my time on this show. You just provided that is a departing vision, where he's getting ready to pass, and he sees his son has come in spirit form to take him to the other side, and he is ready to go, and he holds his hands out, and he is wanting his son to take him, and he is happy. He is happy to go. He is no longer. He's not afraid. He's not. And
at that time, he had no pain. He was in pain all up until that time. He had no pain. He was smiling. and everything, and he left.
And so were you the only one who witnessed this, or were there others who witnessed it?
Oh, the family, my mother-in-law, his wife, and other family members that were around him, because we knew that it was the end.
That's
and the
wonderful.
doctor called us and said, well, you better make it to the hospital.
That's wonderful, though. That's called a group departing vision. That's something you can always treasure as a family.
Oh,
that's
yeah,
a happy ending.
Yeah, it is, because we knew that he would never be in pain anymore. You know?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for sharing this.
Yeah. Well, that's about all I wanted to say, but I was wondering about the baby thing and stuff, so I'm glad you clarified that for me.
Oh, no. He would easily have seen the soul of that baby.
Mhm. Well, thank you very much, Carla. And you have a great show, too. And you're doing really good. I like it. I'm going to go to your website as soon as I get off of here.
Well, thank you very much, Rhonda. We appreciate the call. And that is a great way to end this segment, Carla. And I want to thank you so much for being a guest here again. And we'll get you scheduled again in the next few weeks if you'd like. And we could do a full show, because I really enjoy talking to you. I think this is a important topic. I think it's something, I know it's something I'm definitely interested in. So I do thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Michael. I appreciate it. Now, we might get a little off there, you know. We might have to get into some of this world order stuff, so I don't know what will happen.
That's fine with me.
I might have
All right, Carla.
I might have to have some chamomile tea for that. Okay, Michael, thank you so much.
All right, thank you too, and God bless you. Just amazing accounts, really. You got to look at her information. Go check out her website. Get the book. Just fantastic accounts. I know.
And so a lot of people avoid funerals. They avoid funeral homes. The aging issues in our culture are ridiculous. There's a whole generation, I always talk about my son's generation, 30 years and younger, who are going to be smacked with incredible issues around aging, death, and dying when they start getting into their 40s, because they're going to be so unprepared, because their parents are so death phobic. 200 years ago, I always like to talk about this. 200 years ago, if somebody was getting ready to pass, they usually passed in their own bed. They passed typically with their spouse, with their if it was a child, with their parents. They passed with their own quilts and covers, and they passed with their own pets, and children were also present at a passing, because back then, death and dying, that was part of the landscape, so children were involved. Today, children are I have people who come to my practice, and their big concern will be, my mother has passed away, should I allow my children to go to the funeral of their grandmother? They're very perplexed by this. They see it as being abusive to allow their children to go to the funeral. I remember my youngest son at the age of 3 sitting on my lap playing his Game Boy while my father-in-law was being buried. When my mother-in-law passed away, my 16-year-old was bent on seeing her, and so we said sure, and he went in and he took a look at her and he said, yep, no one's home, and turned around and walked out. But in our culture, we are very, very concerned about children being exposed to death and dying. And when they're not exposed to death and dying in childhood, then they don't know how to deal with it when they get older. So we live in this very death-phobic culture, which is very, very different than it was so many centuries ago. So Centuries ago, if someone began having departing visions, and a departing vision is visitation from deceased relatives or loved ones, this was seen as something very normal. It wasn't seen as unusual or woo-woo or witchcraft or
Please welcome Carla Wills Brandon back to Late Night in the Midlands. Welcome back, Carla.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, and how are you?
We're drying out down here. We've been flooded, and it looks like we're going to get flooded again in a day or so. So we'll see what happens. I might have to paddle my way back and forth to the office.
Well, you better build an ark.
Well, I live in Hurricane Alley, so we all have our boats and our paddles and all that good stuff in our garages. So when my house becomes an island, I just pull down my kayak and put it in the street and take it to wherever I need to go. So won't be the first time.
You know, that's something
I've
never had to deal with a flood yet, and I've never had to deal with an earthquake yet. So those are two things that I'm not looking forward to, and hopefully I can make it through the rest of my life without contending with those two things.
Well, why do you get off? I've had both. That's not fair. I'm going to whine.
I don't know. That has got to be the scariest thing, especially if you're sleeping and you wake up to the whole place shaking. Really has to be terrifying.
Well, having experienced both and having just made the final repairs to my house from a major hurricane a couple of years ago, I think I'll take the earthquake.
Yeah?
I think I'll take the hurricane. No, I don't know. I don't want any of them. I don't want any of them.
Neither. So you got a new book out.
Yes, this is the third in the series on Departing Visions. I think the last time I was on your show, I talked about the first book, and then after that I put together a second book, and so this is the third in the series. So this is actually my 13th book, but my third on the topic of the departing vision. So the first one is called One Last Tug Before I Go. And with that one, that was a byproduct of team where you have somebody who, somebody has passed. A good example, I always like to use my grandmother. My grandmother essentially played a big part in raising me, and I think I'd be more of a heathen, difficult terrorist if I hadn't had my grandmother's influence. She basically was there to teach me how to be a decent human being, and my mother had passed away when I was really, really young, and I was very angry, and I was very sad and very distressed and into all sorts of not very healthy behaviors, and she came along and she mothered me tremendously. And so when she passed, when I was raising my own family, I was devastated. I was very, very upset. My anchor was gone. That's how a lot of us feel when we have a really close relative who has meant a lot to us pass on. We feel like our anchor in the universe is gone. And I had a dream about her. She came to me in a dream, and my grandfather had been the mayor of the city that I grew up in. So my grandmother was always big on dressing well, and she was an immigrant's daughter, so she was also very big on being an American and dressing very American. And so in this dream, the colors were vivid. They were indescribable. And I was sitting at a table, and I was I was devastated. And she walked in, and she grabbed me by the shoulders, and she shook me, and she told me to get over it. She turned around and she walked away. And that's so her. And after that, the grief somewhat evaporated. But other after-death communications can come in the form of, some people talk about seeing butterflies or picking up pennies, or they can even have a full-blown apparition, visitation while awake, where they see their deceased loved one full and complete standing there and saying, I love you, I care about you, just letting us know that they're all right. So that's the after-death communication. Then there is the departing vision. And departing visions these are experiences that a lot of us have. We have witnessed them, but we don't know where to go to talk about them because our society is incredibly death-phobic. You're not supposed to talk about death and dying in our society. Nope. Of me working with a lot of my own clients who had encounters with death and dying, or individuals who shared with me experiences about departing visions with regard to death and dying. Then the second one, there are different types of afterlife experiences that we can have. That's probably the best place for me to start, so that your audience isn't confused by me, because I have a tendency to confuse people very easily.
Oh, you'll fit right in here.
There's the near-death experience. The near-death experience, that there's a best-selling book out right now by a guy named Eben Alexander, who is a neurosurgeon who he was a big-time skeptic, thought all this stuff was woo-woo, and then he had meningitis, died, left his body, and went to the afterlife, and his guide was a sister that he had never met because he was adopted. And so when he came to, after he healed up from the meningitis, he was able to, there's nothing more rewarding than watching a neurosurgeon holding up his own brain scans as he describes how he was clinically dead and there was no way for his frontal cortex to invent all of this stuff. So the near-death experience it's typically somebody comes close to death and they leave their body. A lot of folks nowadays who have had cardiac arrest, because people are brought back from the brink of death, they are reporting near-death experiences where they float out of their bodies. They can hear what doctors and nurses are saying. They can even hear comments like, we've lost him or we've lost her as they're floating above. Then they can float through the walls and be in the waiting room where their loved ones are, and they can repeat back to their loved ones once they're healthy and well again, everything that was said, the tears, sadness. Then they report going up into a tunnel, being greeted by deceased relatives, loved ones, angels, guides, and then venturing forth toward a great white light, which is very loving. And most people who have near-death experiences have a real hard time talking about it when they come back. It's a profound experience. It's very profound. It can take several years to integrate that experience. Then you have what's called...
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say I'm a little curious as to, does the spirit hang around the body for like a few minutes after, say your heart stops? Because, when the doctor brings somebody back, I'm kind of wondering, like, what happened in that little bit of time? Did the spirit leave and say, oh, darn, I got to go back? What happened?
Well, different people have reported different things. My husband had a type of deathbed vision where he conked himself out in the shower. He has vertigo, and he just whacked his head against the tile on the side of the wall, and he went to an afterlife sort of place. The colors are usually described as being extremely vivid, but not everybody talks about hovering around the body. But what they do talk about is they talk about leaving the body, and many of them will talk about going through a tunnel, and they'll also talk about having what's called a life review, where they are shown their life, and we judge our own lives.
I'm going to try to sneak by. When that happens to me, I'm going to try to sneak through.
Oh, come on. I bet you have some loving experiences where you were a loving guy. But that's basically, it's not a miserable experience. It's okay, so we have chosen to be incarnated into this life, and we're here basically to evolve spiritually and to also help those around us evolve a little bit. And we're all all of us, every single last one of us, we're kind of at the bottom rung of the totem pole here. We're at the very beginning stages of all of this. And so what we do is we take a look at, okay, so how well did we do? And what do we need to do to improve upon that? When we go to the afterlife, that's what we take a look at. And so that's called a near-death experience. Then people can have what are called after-death communications. And those, a lot of times those are in the form of a dream.